Today on Sekulow, Russia warns the United States that uncomfortable signals are ahead of the Biden-Putin summit on the 16th.
Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live.
First hackers hit the country's gas supply. Now they've hit the meat supply, shutting down work at the facility behind me, one of the largest in the country. And as these hackers are getting more brazen, experts are warning companies to be on the lookout.
Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110.
JBS notified the administration that the ransom demand came from a criminal organization likely based in Russia.
And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
So it's one thing, for the Biden administration to be pushed around by China. They've got a population of over, a billion people, stronger economic ties to the U.S. So when it's strained, it's strained. But for the second time in just a matter of weeks, first our pipeline, now the meat processing, ransoms being paid by the United States and U.S. companies, and in this case, a Brazilian company that had all these processing plants in the United States, a fifth of the meat processing plants in the United States. And this is all in the lead up to the meeting between Biden and Putin, June 16th in Geneva. And you have the Russian deputy foreign minister willing to go on in the media, which they know will end up getting reported here, and saying, quote, the Americans must assume that a number of signals from Moscow will be uncomfortable for them, including in the coming days. There's debates to be had about how you respond to China and the economic ties, and how do you move away from that when we don't have the manufacturing capability yet in the United States to say, we're done with you, China. But Russia, we don't depend on them for a thing.
No, and you've got...
But we're getting pushed around by them again.
We are getting pushed around by them again, and you have a former CIA Moscow station chief, Dan Hoffman, who noted that he said all of this is Vladimir Putin's resurgence strategy. This is Putin trying to play strongman, which, Andy, we've talked about before, and a lot of these autocrats, that's what they do.
Well, where did Putin come from? He came from an environment of the Communist Party. He knew how to push people around. He knew how to intimidate, how to rattle the sword, how to rattle the saber, because he learned it in the old communist system. And he's just put on a different hat, different face. Now he does his cross and kisses icons, but he's still the same Putin, and he's still acting the same way, Jay.
Yeah, and he was a former KGB agent.
I was going to say, he was the director of the KGB at one point, as I recall. Putin is a thug. He is an international bully, and part of the reason, like a lot of bullies, he's that way is because he realizes the Soviet Union is no more. His military is so much weaker than the United States and a lot weaker than NATO combined, and so he throws his weight around, and the only way you can really deal with a thug or a bully is to stand up to a thug or bully, and I'm not sure Biden's doing that.
Yeah, and I agree. And, Jordan, people are thinking, why meatpacking processing plants?
I think it's anything that's vulnerable that they know they can get a quick few $1 million off of. And that's what they're
basically doing. Now we're into a hostage ransom situation.
I think the pipeline was more serious because that affects the ability to travel in the United States. It's one thing to say, okay, you can't have hamburgers for a couple of days. That wasn't even the case. These companies are acting quick. They're getting hacked immediately. They're paying it out to Russia in cryptocurrencies and other ways. And the idea here, it is easier for people to understand that when the Chinese do something, whatever name they do it under, the Chinese government had to bless it. In Russia, you've got the mob, you've got criminal elements, but you would not be taking on international conglomerates without the nation, the federal government there, which is the Russian government.
And the Russian intel knows this, too.
Yeah,
they
giving them a pass. Or else they'd be arresting them. They could arrest these people and treat them like the criminals they are. But they're not, because it's all tied together. It's not as clear-cut as China, where everything is state-controlled. But certainly, you don't get away with doing this in Russia without a nod, at least, from the powers that be. And the powers that be happen to be extremely tied into those same mob elements that control too much of Russian society, unfortunately. When we come back, Rick Riddell will be joining us to talk about this. The pipeline in Russia that Joe Biden's okay with, while at the same time canceling the Keystone Pipeline, stopping Alaskan drilling yesterday. We'll talk about all of it when we get back.
President Biden is getting ready for his first big face-to-face meeting this month with Russian leader Vladimir Putin.
Putin will be assessing, and he's not going to see Joe through the prism of the media mob and big tech. He will be assessing Joe Biden, and I'm pretty confident he'll come to the same conclusion that many of you have.
There's some big issues up here. One is whether Biden says, listen, you're not going into the Ukraine. We're not going to tolerate that. Another one has to do with political dissidence. Another has to do with hacking, SolarWinds, and the potential links to the colonial hack. Others have to do with things like Belarus and the air piracy.
The most notable is the fact that we have a START treaty. This has to do with our strategic nuclear weapons. We could make some improvements on that.
Even the venue of Geneva sounds really Cold War. It was where Reagan and Gorbachev met. It is the most neutral of neutral environments, and frankly, it's where adversaries meet.
Russia is also issuing other warnings ahead of this June 16th meeting, suggesting that there will be many signals in the coming days that the United States will find uncomfortable, specifically pointing to how they're beefing up of their military along their western borders.
They're claiming the reason for doing that is a false claim, saying it's NATO's aggressiveness. NATO is a defense organization, and its focus is completely on defending itself.
The continuous expansion and activity of NATO, the fact that NATO still exists, frankly, has been a thorn in Russia's side for 20 years.
Operation Allied Sky, intended to demonstrate what they call credibility of common defense.
It's part of a large-scale NATO mission involving more than 20 NATO members flying over NATO states. And in part, it's a message to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. We are joined by Rick Riddell, our Senior Advisor for Foreign Policy and National Security. Rick, I want to go right off the top here. So we got Russia. We have a Russian official saying, quote, the Americans must assume that a number of signals from Moscow will be uncomfortable for them, including in the coming days. This is in light of the June 16th summit between Biden and Putin in Geneva. Here's my question, Rick, right off the bat, which is, I get complications with China because of the economic ties, because of our own manufacturing, unfortunately, inefficiencies and things that we need to build up in America that make it harder to cut off immediately. Not that we shouldn't be tough on the Chinese. But the Russians, we're approving pipelines for Russia. We're canceling our own pipelines here. We're canceling Alaska drilling. They're beefing up their military in the West. This is a pretty serious show of something from Russia leading up to this meeting. And it seems like the U.S. just keeps shrugging our shoulders. Ransoms get paid. And, first it was our pipeline, then it's meat.
And we've got our recruiting videos, which are clearly permeated with woke culture and language and not looking for the best and the brightest. And I think that's a big problem. Look, I think that what the Russians are signaling is exactly what Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has publicly said, which is exactly what the Chinese told us in Alaska, which is that America is a racist, sexist, homophobic place. They get these talking points from the Democrats, who have spent the last 4 years telling Americans that our entire system supports racism and sexism. And so we can't be surprised when countries like Russia and China are going to leverage those talking points while negotiating with us to try to get the upper hand.
Of course, it's so the duplicity in this is historic in scope. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese government criticizing the United States on human rights abuse is or discrimination is really absurd when you think about it. I mean, recognize what Putin has previously said about these very issues. Oh, we don't have that in our country, and China, of course, denies everything. But there's a fundamental thing going on here, Rick, and that is this idea that we've got U.S. companies now are paying for basically ransom is becoming now the cost of doing business.
Look, I learned in my 8 years at the UN that Russia and China do not respond to moral arguments. When we create arguments to say, do the right thing, or the international community is asking you to do the right thing, or just, don't be racist, sexist, or homophobic. These are all moral arguments that work in the United States, but in Russia and China, they don't have a moral compass. They don't care about these arguments. They're looking for business deals and money and leverage. And so we have to be smarter when dealing with countries like Russia and China and some other countries that are not moralistic in nature. And we have to make the best arguments. So when our companies are trying to do business with these entities, they have to be shrewd and they have to understand what works and what doesn't. Moral arguments do not work.
Rick, this is a question I have because the reporting gets very different. When it's China, everyone gets the nod that there's nothing really in China that's going on. It's not Chinese government control. They have a hand in every company, every corporation, and that's kind of accepted. In Russia, it's all being blamed on these criminal elements. But I'm thinking this is a strongman government. If they wanted to clamp down on these criminal elements, they could. They don't have to allow this to go on. So is it similar? I mean, when you were dealing with it at the UN, is this a similar type relationship with China, just on a smaller scale, that these entities are getting the nod, they're getting the okay to move forward with these attacks on a superpower like the United States?
I think they're different in that the Chinese are very ideologically driven. I mean, take, for instance, now they're telling families in China that you can possibly have 3 children, not just 2 anymore. So they're controlling the number of babies that are born. But a country like Russia is just really, it's all about Putin and money and the oligarchs. It's a corrupt regime. It's not as ideological as you think. Their ideology is, how do we make the elites more money?
Benjamin Disraeli famously said that when you're dealing, and was talking about Russia actually in the 1860s, that they understand one thing, and that's power. And you could have power doesn't necessarily mean war. He said power can be diplomacy can be power, but he had this phrase of diplomacy is war. I mean, it's a kind of a war element to diplomacy, but they understand power. What are we signaling right now with letting all of this just fester like it is?
Well, that's such a great point, Jay, because also I would take it to one step further. Therefore, if they understand power, they don't have a consistent moral compass where hypocrisy or pointing out hypocrisy or hypocritical policies is something that's going to work. They can't be embarrassed because it's all about the power and the money. And so I think what we have to do when we send in negotiators, which we are now going to be in a negotiation with Russia, we have to understand what moves them. What do they maximize? And we are going to be at a deficit if we try to make some sort of arguments of do the right thing and behave like an international player. And that's just where we've flawed in the past. We've done it through multiple administrations. I would say Donald Trump didn't do that. He negotiated from strength and from power and from trade and from money and from economic input.
I think you're right, Rick. And in many ways, the Putin regime is a criminal organization. It really is. And I think about that. But what I'm wondering, other than things like the START Treaty, which I know you're very familiar with, what is it that we need from Russia that would cause the Biden administration to signal weakness and to sort of be super nice and bend over backwards for them? President Biden said yesterday that he has to believe that Putin did not know about the hacking of JBS because in a civilized country, they would not allow that to happen. I don't think he really believes that. I think he's trying to convince the Russians that maybe he believes that to try to entice them to act nice. But for the United States itself, geopolitically, what is it that we need from them that would cause us to really not be stronger, more firm with the Russians?
Well, ironically, what we need from the Russians is for them to act more moral, is to play by the rules and to follow the rules. Yeah. And so that's where I think the rub is that we want them to act like a responsible international country and therefore follow the rules, whether it be international trade rules or UN rules, the rules of engagement in war, just to be honest and fair. But I think that we have to start from the premise that that's not what they maximize. And so we're going to have to put guardrails. And what I would argue is the exact line, the old Reagan line, which is trust but verify. So we need to have transparency and guardrails so that we understand how to check them, because we can't trust them.
Yeah, I'm going to take a call. Let's go to Dodger in Kansas on line 1. Hey, Dodger, welcome to Sekulow. You are on the air.
First off, thank you very much for taking my call. Sure. My question is, so when it comes to the summit between the president of Russia and the president of the United States, I was wondering, what do you think the differences are between a Trump-Putin summit as opposed to a Biden-Putin summit?
Power. I mean, I think that the lack of you saw the relation between Putin and Trump was one of mutual respect, because you had strong leaders on both sides. I don't like the way he leads, obviously, Vladimir Putin, but you can't say he doesn't exercise power and projects power. President Trump projected power with the Russians, so they weren't going to mess with us. That's how I take it, Rick.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I would just state that it's a confidence thing. Right now, Putin is extremely confident that he can outmaneuver Biden. And this is an opportunity for the Biden team, is to come in, and when you're the underdog, when people are not suspecting that you're going to be tough, have a couple of ways to really put them in the corner and show that somehow what appears to be weakness is not weakness. That's the challenge for the Biden team. They know that Putin thinks that they're a pushover, and so they're going to have to counter that somehow, some way.
Folks, again, it's always great to have Rick Grenell, our Senior Advisor for Foreign Policy and National Security, especially this summit leading up to June 16th. The Russians say it's going to get more and more heated, more and more uncomfortable is the term they use. We've already seen the pipeline hack and the ransom paid, and then the meat processing plant all paid.
20% of our meat processing goes through that plant.
Yeah, and it gets paid immediately. These ransoms are getting paid, and the summit is still 14 days away. So I know we'll be talking about with this Rick. And remember, we just green-lighted a pipeline for them in Germany, where Rick was the ambassador from the U.S. to Germany. So Rick is always great.
We closed one in the United States.
Closed
one
that
down.
And drilling in Alaska.
Yeah. Really, really great policies when you think of the danger of this. So thanks, Rick. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll have a lot to talk about with Rick in these coming couple of weeks. Just on this issue alone and how the Biden administration will deal with it. We come back, we'll start taking more of your phone calls to 1-800-684-3110. What's the ACLJ up to at the United Nations as well? 1-800-684-3110. We'll be right back.
I was at a board meeting at Jews for Jesus, and the executive director said, we've got a case. The Supreme Court had just granted review. It was about literature distribution at airports.
We wanted to have the Bible study meet in the school, but it turned into a problem when the principal said, no, you can't have it.
I told her that I wanted to sing Noel, and the principal said that we can't have anything to do with Christ in our songs.
We marched around the country defending evangelism in Chicago, in Boston, in New York, Atlanta, Texas, Southern California, Northern California, and points in between.
The IRS is expected to reveal the results of an internal investigation that shows the agency targeted conservative groups.
This was a complete misuse of the Office of the Internal Revenue Service.
We only persevered because the ACLJ was there.
The federal courts do not need to become monitors of state trespass actions, and that's all this is.
We were looking for the right to speak our minds and our consciences, and we won that right today.
Those of us that believe in life know that we're on the right side of history. We understand full well children are children, and they're precious in God's sight, and they're precious in our nation's sight, and they're precious to parents.
Religious persecution is a situation where your life is literally put in jeopardy simply because of what you believe.
Can you help? Can you do something? He's on death row, and so we launched an international campaign.
If we don't use that freedom to advocate for these people suffering under religious persecution, who will?
back to Sekulow. So we're going to keep following everything out of Russia in this lead up to the summit, which the Russians say basically be on alert, making threats to the United States. I would love to see the United States stand up today in a meeting and say, you know what, never mind on that pipeline. And by the way, we're going to start we're going to put in economic sanctions on you, Putin, and everyone associated with you in the lead up. Take something off the table from the Russians. Hack something with there. We've got cyber forces. Take down their infrastructure. Take down their entire military's way of communicating. Do something, just to show that you can. It'd be nice if we had a country that just showed that, hey, we have this power to wield. We're not bad actors like you. We're not going to ransom it off, but we will show you temporarily how quickly we could ruin you and your basically your mob kingdom, which is nothing like China.
Yeah, we're going to turn to UN in a minute, but I was going to ask this to Andy. I used that quote with Disraeli about understanding power, and what Jordan just outlined is a power move. Again, it's diplomacy as war. It's not bullets. It's diplomacy. You think you could do that to us? We're not, like you said, we're not going to ask for ransom. We're just going to show you for 2 hours. We're going to shut down your grid. See how that works.
This is the difference between someone who reads a history book and someone who does not. If you'll notice, Jay, that in the case of Pastor Brunson in Turkey, he was incarcerated in Turkey. President Trump basically told President Erdogan, I will make sure that your lira is worth pennies. In 24 hours, I will make your lira worth absolutely nothing if you don't release that pastor. And Erdogan blinked because President Trump exuded power, could exercise power, would have done that, and the Turkish economy would have been in utter and complete shambles. And suddenly, miraculously, Pastor Brunson is released.
Yes,
this is the kind of power and authority that the United States should exude and the leader of the free world should exude. Biden is incapable, I'm afraid, of doing that.
He certainly hasn't shown that he's going to do that. Now, let's turn to the United Nations, because the European Center for Law and Justice, our European affiliate, is a non-governmental organization with the UN. That's a story in and of itself, how we got that status. But Cece Hiles, our senior counsel, she works on these issues, and there's a lot of them up right now, Cece, including the situation with Nigeria and Boko Haram. Let's talk about what we've done and what's the status of everything.
Sure. So we take every opportunity we can at the UN to point out human rights atrocities. And we do that in the Human Rights Council's general sessions, and we do that at the working group on universal periodic reviews. And so this is the 47th session of the Human Rights Council, and we filed submissions with Nigeria, on Myanmar, on human trafficking, and on the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And Nigeria is one that's really
the story about what's going on there, because the Cherubou case has made a lot of news. But there's people, we have new listeners all the time.
Sure.
The one in Nigeria has a specific person attached to it. That it's a really tragic situation that we've been working on for a couple of years now.
Right. And in our report, we were able to point out that since 2013, we've actually done 17 submissions to the UN, pointing out the atrocities in Nigeria and specifically asking for Leah Cherubou's release. So in 2018, in February of 2018, Boko Haram, who's a terrorist organization there in Nigeria, kidnapped schoolgirls. And Leah Cherubou was only 14 when she was kidnapped. And she was held on because she was the only one that would not renounce her faith in Christ. And so she has been held captive. She just celebrated on May 14th. She just celebrated her 18th birthday. So this is the fourth, and I say celebrate, she just had her 18th birthday. Right. She has been held captive, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old.
And now has two children by these
now
captives.
Has two children by the captives, yes.
So,
and
I mean, this
lost her childhood.
This is the thing that people need to understand. These UN submissions are not just, well, here's a piece of paper and let's see what happens. These are real people involved in these. And sometimes, and Jordan, you've done these interventions, Cece's done the role interventions, we all have. You have to bring this up constantly. You have to, it's not friendly territory at the UN, but you have to be there. It's the ministry of presence.
Yeah, that's right. And if you don't talk about these issues, these groups, again, that continue to act the same way. And in these cases with Nigeria, you have what you have is a government that is just weak. They're unwilling to go in and try to do anything. So they've been paying ransoms too. That's their modus operandi. Yeah. So you see some releases in the past, but in these more high profile situations, unfortunately, what you see is that again, they're not willing to send their military in. They're not, and that's because they have a very disjointed country. It's 50% Muslim and 50% Christian, and we're not talking about just kind of, that's how I associate with my cultural group. So it does not go well. It doesn't necessarily mix well. It's very, very turbulent, and you add all that together. So someone has to speak the truth to these countries. Can't just let them get away with, as we keep saying back, going and having their tea and coffee and cigarettes together in the UN rooms. You have to hold them to account and embarrass them. And that's what you do. I mean, a lot of the UN, for what the work we do is hold them account, make them look like the weak countries they are. The cost of their suit, the cost of their tie doesn't mean they don't come from countries that don't even have militaries, that can't even protect their own citizens.
Yep. So I want to focus in on Nigeria and the Leah Sharibu case. As far as we know, she's still alive. That's the reports that are indicated. Has the UN taken the mantle on this at all? Have they done anything in response to these reports we filed?
They have not, and that's what our report is pointing out, that you need to take some action.
What is
someone
it that we're
has
asking
to be
them to do, Cece?
held accountable.
Yeah. So because in some of these cases we've gotten that unlawful detention committee has done it, and then we get a release. What are we asking for here?
That the UN actually acknowledges that there is something that Nigeria can do, and they should be taking action. And we, just like you said, we bring the human story to the United Nations. We're able to put our clients there to testify, and here to say there is an 18-year-old little girl who could be your daughter, who could be my daughter, who could be anyone at the UN, their daughter. She has been captive by terrorists and not released, and now has been forced to have 2 children. She's literally lost her childhood at the hands of terrorists, and Nigeria has done nothing.
And the UN, Andy, has done nothing, which means you have. And by the way, what we can't do is say, "Oh, well, the UN's doing nothing." We can't. We have to keep bringing it up and bringing it up, like Jordan said, embarrass them into action.
And that's what we do, Jay, in our practice before the United Nations. It's a question of persistence on the international scheme. You have addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations. You know what it is to stand there with the Assembly of the Nations in front of you. And we have done that kind of work, and we persist in doing that kind of work. Whether we get results immediately or in the long run, the question is that the ACLJ persists in bringing these civil rights and human rights violations before the international forums. And hopefully someday, somewhere, the governments in Africa, throughout the world, not just in Africa, but throughout the world where we make these interventions, will come to and do something about the people who profess their Christian faith, for example, in the case of this young woman, and who are persecuted, who are raped, who are destroyed in their lives by it.
All right, we come back. Again, we're going to continue to take your phone calls, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110 as we continue on with the international focus, because the U.S., again, it's hit every week with another international crisis targeting corporations, ransoms, and then you've got this summit between Biden and Putin. Remember, Biden approving a pipeline for Germany and Russia, closing a pipeline to the United States. We'll be back, second half hour coming up.
Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. Let me just reset for a second. So what we are seeing play out in the last couple of weeks in a lead-up to a summit between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. Remember, I want to remind you that for 4 years we were told Russia's the big threat. It's not China, it's not Iran, it's Russia. It's always Russia. Everything involving Russia. Then when Russian actors do take on, whether it's a U.S. business and the pipeline, or a Brazil-based meat processing company, where 1/5 of our meat in the United States is from their processing plants in the U.S. that they own, they're hacked by Russia. And then the Russian, a spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry comes out and says things are going to get really uncomfortable in the lead up to June 16th. I don't see Democrats, liberals, the left rushing to figure out Hunter Biden's contacts with these people and the Ukrainians. Where are they on that? I mean, this is, again, China. We know the Biden family's gotten rich off China. We know they've gotten rich off Burisma, too. When they were getting rich off Burisma, by the way, it was Ukraine was being controlled by Russia. The president of Ukraine was a Russian, basically, asset. So this is, remember, it all got overthrown.
Yes.
The only reason they ever got into Paul Manafort's office because those guys had to flee.
Right.
They had to leave Ukraine. And they were, but that was, again, no one's talking about negotiating that. They're literally threatening us in lead up to a sit-down meeting.
But don't worry. Good news. The most effective communicator we have will be there in Geneva. This is the White House Deputy Press Secretary, Karen Jean-Pierre.
President Biden is the most effective communicator of American values and priorities, and hearing directly from President Putin is the most effective way to understand Russian plans and intents.
So I'm going to go to Wes and Andy in this first. So don't worry, Putin's going to tell the president what the Russians are planning and in what they intend.
Yeah, and then he's going to get a lecture from Biden, the most effective communicator. Let me tell you, Vladimir Putin is laughing at Joe Biden. Vladimir Putin is a tough, hard KGB agent turned Russian Orthodox, pious, and so forth. But he's the same man of steel that he always was, and nothing happens in Russia that he doesn't know and control about. And he's going to sit across the table and be lectured about moral rights and human rights by Joe Biden, who can't even elucidate a sentence, who can't even come out with a coherent thought, who represents weakness and effeteness in the United States. I think there will be a laughable session.
Well, I think his entire family is compromised, including Biden himself, his brother, with doing business with these guys.
Yeah, well, they do
millions of dollars in business they are paying a crack addict.
Yeah, I know that.
Think about that. So the Russians know they could do this because they were paying the crack addict's son while he was on crack millions of dollars a month. And guess where that money was going to? The whole Biden family. And this is a guy who's
Don't worry, there's a special prosecutor.
Yeah, right. I mean, but there's not.
I know.
There's no special prosecutor.
Well, the U.S. attorney in Delaware.
Yeah, I don't know where he is anymore. I don't think he exists. Maybe he's a Russian agent. But, we're not talking about, $5,000 here or there. We're talking about millions to a family that has been on the government payroll forever. That's Joe Biden. You think I was talking about a communist, on the government payroll forever. But literally, that's all he's done. And he's used his family to reap the rewards of that. And both the countries that are causing us the most trouble right now are the countries they've reaped all the money from. One released a pandemic on the world, either intentionally or unintentionally. And the other is hacking all of our businesses. One shut down travel. The next shut down food. They're just showing you what they can do. And what they can do is pretty catastrophic. Why are we doing anything? Oh, because who's seen Joe Biden talking in days other than telling bad jokes and forgetting what Memorial Day is about? We'll be right back.
It's another attack on critical infrastructure, this time the food supply. The world's biggest meat producer, JBS, forced to curtail operations after a ransomware attack.
JBS Foods is one of the largest meat producers in the world. It was forced to bring all of its U.S. plants to a halt after this crippling cyber attack. The White House, as we said, issuing that stern warning for Russia.
The White House is engaging directly with the Russian government on this matter and delivering the message that responsible states do not harbor ransomware criminals.
Preliminary reports suggest that it was a hacker group called Riddell, or ransomware evil. They sell ransomware to customers, essentially, to help those customers breach and raise money from honest companies.
Last month, a ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline led to gas shortages. Russian hacking group The Dark Side claimed responsibility and walked away with over $4 million from Colonial.
You know, my own knowledge of the Russian intelligence agencies, they basically operate in every sector within their own countries and clearly know what kind of criminal elements are involved.
This is more blatant than I've seen in my career. They are going after this in the solar winds. You think 18,000 companies, and now, as you said, 7,000 more with this last U.S. aid attack, and the Colonial Pipeline. Even though they claim that was from hackers, I believe they're associated somehow. They're sending a message, and they're doing it blatantly. And they're going after our intelligence system, and they're saying, we can do this.
The problem that we see in the United States with our infrastructure, whether that's energy, electric, water, or food or hospitals, is we have outdated legacy systems. We have cybersecurity just viewed as a regular budget line item, when in reality, it's the new war front.
Segment off here because what Jordan just said about what's going on and the projected weakness that we're doing has got really serious implications and puts our national security at risk. We have been hacked now in our transportation system, and I say that because of the fuel issue that we had 3 weeks ago. Shut down the East Coast travel for about 4 days. Had people almost panicking. This meatpacking people are saying, well, I don't know, is that a big deal? Yeah, it's a really big deal. Because companies are now spending money to keep out Russian hackers. And if you think this is going on without the Russian government being somewhat aware, guess again. But I want to take it a step further. The naivete of what's going on here, Wes, is what's got me concerned.
Yeah. I mean, you go into a summit normally signaling strength, cooperation, willing to negotiate, I'll be your friend, but strength. President Biden is actually going into this summit signaling weakness. It's like I was asking you during the break. Going into a summit with Russia, and they're bad actors, and they harbor bad actors. Why would you lift sanctions on a Russian pipeline that is so valuable to them financially and strategically 2 weeks before that summit? Why not at least use that as a bargaining chip going into the summit? Why would you do that? But as I told you during the break, Robert Gates, the former Secretary of Defense, wrote a book a few years ago, and in that book, he said that in every international issue that came up during his time with the CIA and the Department of Defense, that Joe Biden was literally wrong on every issue, including trying to get Osama bin Laden when he was killed. And he was asked the question a few weeks ago, do you still think that is true? He is now the president of the United States. Do you still think he is wrong on every issue? And Robert Gates says yes. And he is wrong on this. He's going into a summit signaling weakness. Why would you do that?
Yeah, we operate all over the world, so we understand the ramifications of this. And you got, President Putin we're sending our most effective communicator. That's what the White House is, of course, going to say with the president. But yet she also says in the same sentence, but we will understand directly from Putin what Russia plans and intends. Now, Cece, you've done a lot of international negotiations on behalf of the ACLJ. Putin is not going to tell us his plans.
No, and what's silly is we already have an idea of what those plans are, and we're totally ignoring them. But we know with these regimes, just like Andy said, when we were dealing, had an issue with Turkey, you don't win those positions by showing weakness. You show power, and that is what got Pastor Brunson out, is when we didn't back down and the United States showed power.
Yeah.
That's what is effective.
I just think it's one industry after another, and so you have to look for. Okay, so banking would be the next one. I mean, where are we vulnerable? We're vulnerable online. Everybody's banking online. No one's using cash anymore. But what if you do go to the ATM, like you're saying, it doesn't work for an hour?
There would be panic in the United States. Stock markets would collapse. And
these companies have safe havens that are pretty that are, again, they're not having to hide out in some random hit mountain somewhere where they don't have internet access. They're able to use all of the technology and the power that comes with that technology while not having to fear being any consequences from their own government, so long as I'm sure they're lining the pocket of government officials in Russia, which is at a minimum, how these hacks are going forward is that they are paying off Russian government officials like Putin to build another palace for him. So if you want to talk to Sarah, too, it's 1-800-684-3110.
We have an interesting soundbite. I want to play it because, and this is a good setup, and that is, are we rewarding the Russia? You remember when they didn't want President Trump meeting with Vladimir Putin because, the Russia conspiracy, and that ended up being a total hoax. Now, listen to this question from the reporter. It's a little bit inaudible at the end, but take a listen to the reporter's question and then the deputy press secretary's comments.
Is there any rethinking of the summit with Vladimir Putin in 2 weeks, given this latest ransomware attack? You said a criminal organization based in Russia, and conversation.
Appreciate the question. So we do not regard, as you can imagine, this meeting with Russian president as a reward, right? We regard it as a vital part of defending America's interests. President Biden is meeting with Vladimir Putin because of our country's differences, not in spite of them. There's a lot we have to work through.
I don't mind meeting, Andy. I always say there's nothing wrong with leaders of countries meeting. But you have to have an agenda, and you have to have a process, and you have to show some strength, and you have to show the ability that Wes said earlier during our break, someone like Ronald Reagan, who walked out of the meeting when necessary.
You have to have the ability, and you have to have the predisposition that Donald Trump would have had, and that is, if I don't like what I hear and you start lecturing me and you start threatening me, I'm going to get up and leave. And you know very well that Donald Trump would have gotten up and left the meeting, just as the American delegation in Anchorage, when they were being lectured by the Chinese, should have got up and left and said, you're not going to tell me I'm a racist country that enslaves our population and not tolerate that. But Joe Biden doesn't have that ability. He doesn't have the sense to do that. He doesn't have the backbone or the guts to do that, Jay.
But, it's more than that, though. This is policy. You have to understand something here. This is not just some, idle thought. This is not some, how do we handle it? This is the policy that's being put forward. They hack our fuel lines. We do nothing. They hack our meat processing plants. We do nothing. Next thing they hack, we do nothing. We doing nothing. Guess what? Russia's government, it may be strong in Russia, but their economy is weak. Their military is weak. Their ability to engage on the world stage is not strong. I don't care how many troops they mass on these borders. The fact of the matter is, that's all that is a test to the United States.
No, I mean, mostly it's a criminal-run country, not a lot of unity. Be easy to topple a Putin type. Might not be worth toppling a Putin type. I'm not saying that that's because you don't know who is next or who's worse. But at the same time, I mean, this is again, it's not a country that has the luxury of acting this way unless they feel like there's no repercussions and they can line their pockets. They're not, it's interesting. We don't know yet the number that was paid by the meat processing company. It's Brazilian-based, but, I mean, it's a fifth of our meat processing plants. But the last one, it wasn't like they got paid $50 million. Right. It's $4.4 million. But they wanted quick hits, 1 hour hits. So, like you said, it's how many times can you take down something for a couple of hours, 24 hours, $5 million, disappear, move on, which just shows you, but that will start building up after the wind turbines, the pipeline, we don't know about yet, but let's assume it's around that same amount. Now you're getting into $20 million of just lining criminals' pockets.
Yeah, and then while we are approving the completion of a Russian pipeline with Germany, we closed the United States.
Instead of banning Germany from using natural gas.
Which is what it should have been.
Only buying, how about saying, buy ours?
Right. Instead, it'd be great, except we're closing our pipelines down.
Right.
I mean, and stop drilling in Alaska. So that now we become energy dependent on these countries that we're supposed to be fighting with.
Yeah, the last 4 years, for the first time in our history, we were completely energy independent.
Say that again. People need to understand that.
First time in the history of the United States, we were completely energy independent under Donald Trump. That already is not going to be the case. The great communicator, President Biden, that Ms. Jean-Pierre talks about, that's going to understand Putin and Russia's intentions. I can tell you what some of their intentions are. They are going to invade Ukraine because they had 14,000 troops on that border, and we complained they moved the troops back but left all their tanks, weapons, and supplies on the Ukrainian border. They're going to continue to bully the world. They're going to continue to sell weapons to Iran, which ships them to Yemen. Those are the kinds of things that he intends to do.
Cece, you're dealing with a case right now in China for Pastor Saul. Again, very difficult government to deal with, the Chinese government.
Extremely. Again, it's these same kind of regimes where they don't know anything but power. I think when Rick was on, he said you're doing humanity and you're pleading with them to do the right thing. They don't operate that way. They operate like bullies by power. And so when we have situations like this, like in China, it's extremely hard because
Pastor Saul's been in jail now for 4 years?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And is there any, what has the UN done on that one?
Well, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention ruled in our favor. And so we have a good opinion that says for China to release him immediately and pay him reparations.
So I think this is important for people to understand. This has been a long process for Sisi to get that win. Took a while. Now we got it. Now what happens?
We just keep forcing and pushing and asking because that's all that we can do.
Meanwhile, they're a member of the P5. And they could disregard a UN resolution like this, Jordan, from the arbitrary detention.
Yeah, you disregard it. They could veto any kind of moves against them. But the truth is, we aren't flexing our muscles. Still, unilaterally, the U.S. can do more than the UN. I mean, I'll repeat that again. We have more resources to take down governments, hack elections if we feel like it, throw out leaders. This is all done without military action. Take down economies. And yet, it just seems like we've lost our edge. We've lost the edge of espionage. We've lost the edge of taking down leaders or embarrassing people like Putin. We should be embarrassing him every day with a personal story, leaking out information about his life, except we don't even know what his life is. Think about that. Are we afraid to tell people? Is that because you're paying the crack addict son? We don't want to tell anybody about what he's doing? Who is he? Where are his children? Living in Switzerland, probably, like most of these kids do. But why aren't we doing more without having to take military action? But we're letting them run rampant around the world. We're getting weaker.
We don't know what they're going to hit us
months.
with next. We have no idea.
I'm before you today, and it's a humbling experience for me. But the task that we have before us is great, and we have no time for delay. In one of my very first Supreme Court arguments, one of the legal journals said I was rude, aggressive, and obnoxious. We won that case unanimously. In 2009, we opened our permanent office in Jerusalem. 1 year later, I found myself before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, the ICC. The Palestinian Authority, much like the BDS movement of today, sought to utilize an international tribunal for one purpose, and one purpose only, to delegitimize the Jewish state of Israel. I argued the law, and the law was clear. The Palestinian Authority was not a state. It had no business being before the ICC, and the case must be dismissed. BDS is the flip side of that same coin. We call it lawfare, utilizing the legal system to delegitimize a people or a group. They cloak it in the garb of the civil rights movement. This is no civil rights movement. This is an unconstitutional and illegal advocacy taking place in the United States of America. Make no mistake, the goal is unambiguous. The intent is clear. It is to create an environment so hostile that those students of you that are here today would be afraid to say the word, I am a Zionist. I am a Jew. Never, never on the memory of our families should we allow that to take place, and the least in the United States of America.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We can take your phone calls to 1-800-684-3110. Going back to some of our UN submissions, one that sticks out to me because you would think it'd be easy. You'd think this is, again, another one where the world would say, yeah, this is right, terrorists are bad. We submitted to the UN Human Rights Council, who requested that the UN condemn Hamas and the Palestinian Authority for their many violations of international human rights law. We lay it all out. They won't. Especially the UN Human Rights Council, which I have to remind people, remember, like the UN Refugee and Works Agency, the Trump administration stopped funding, stopped participating, and because of the biases of the members, when you get their CC and you actually speak out and you look at the country list of who is running the Human Rights Council, I mean, it's not to say that you don't want to reach out to countries that have problems, but the countries that get empowered by these, it's laughable.
Right. They're the biggest offenders, the ones that are running it. And so that's why we stepped out. But we don't stop at the ACLJ and the ECLJ. We don't stop advocating because we want to be the one voice that points this out about Hamas and the PA, because we know that the UN continuously goes after Israel. And we point out just the ridiculousness of that. And we're able to do that. You spoke at the BDS conference, and we continue to take every opportunity to point out human rights atrocities and typically taking on the underdogs.
I am holding in my hand our submission. And do we have these on the screen for people? Let me hold it up there so you can kind of see it. Maybe they can get one up in the next minute or two. Let them get there. Oh, there it is. Okay, so you put this on a UN letterhead. That's how it's worded, and it's called Written Statement Submitted by the European Center for Law and Justice in English and then in French. And as Jordan said, and Cece was just talking about, this one is requesting that the UN condemn Hamas and the Palestinian Authority for their many violations of international human rights law, which we laid the record out, because regardless of the action taken or the lack of action taken, we want, Andy, on the record the violations of international law that here are so pronounced.
This is exactly what we do at the ACLJ and at our European counterpart, the European Center for Law and Justice centered in Strasbourg. We lay the record out. We give it fact by fact, chapter and verse. Here are the facts. Here is what has happened. Here are the atrocities that have been committed by the Palestinian Authority and by Hamas in the case of the instrument that you just showed the viewers and the listeners. And we lay it out. The conclusions then we draw, and then we hope that the United Nations and other agencies like UNRWA and their counterparts will come out and adopt what we say and do something about it. All we can do is dig out the facts, and we spend enormous amounts of time doing that.
I want people to understand that putting these reports together, I'm holding 5 or 6 of them in my hand. Cece has an entire team of lawyers and government affairs experts working on these all the time. I mean, there's constantly how many reports? We must submit, 50, 100 reports a year? I mean, it's a lot.
We do, yes, because, again, we take every opportunity that we can at the UN, and that's through the general sessions or like the working group on the Universal Periodic Review, which goes after the human rights violations. And in a 5-year period, we review every single member state at the UN. So
you hear that? Let her repeat that again. I want that to sink in over a 60-month period.
Yes. We review every single member state at the UN, their human rights violations.
So, I mean, this amount of work that goes into this, folks, is really significant. And, Wes, from your perspective in the military, pointing these things out is very important.
Very, very important. We are the voice, sometimes the only voice for the rule of law, for justice, for freedom, and for the voiceless. I was thinking about the United Nations, and I know it's an uphill battle, CC, that we're engaged in, but I was looking at 2019, because last year with COVID, the General Assembly did not meet in as many regular sessions. But in the year before that, when they had our normal year at the United Nations, there was a total of something like 6 resolutions bringing, to bear, condemning places like Iran and North Korea. That year, there were over 100 resolutions in the United Nations passed against the state of Israel.
I think
that's what we're against.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the reality is that the work at the UN, and I want our audience and those of you that support the ACLJ to understand this. This is ongoing all the time. You're currently working on submissions now for July.
Yes.
How many countries will be in that one?
That's the actual last session in the cycle.
Okay.
So there's only 11, but typically there's 14.
Only 11. I mean, we only have to do reports on 11 countries. I'm just trying to give you the sense of the scope of what this is.
That's right. And I do say only 11 just because there's typically 14 throughout the 5-year period, but the last one is the one that they reduced because it's not an even number.
Yeah.
But we do these 3 times a year. So as soon as we end on this one, as soon as we submit them, our team will start working on the next ones. And so we have research going on constantly.
Jordan, people need to understand we fought long and hard for that UN status for a reason, and that is we wanted to have an impact. It's the Ministry of Presence. You have to be there, even if it's a hostile environment. And believe me, the UN Human Rights Council is a hostile environment.
Yeah, I mean, so we're able to still take the action, even when the U.S. said we're out, we're done. We don't have to. It doesn't mean we don't have a voice. We still have a voice. When you do have a weaker administration coming in and playing footsie with the UN, we're able to go in and still call out the problems. But I think the biggest issue we face is that we're being led by an administration that would love to do one of these reports about how bad we are. I saw that, and I think that there's the idea that the language that's used. It's okay to acknowledge wrongs of the past and history. We are living in reality, and these countries, we have genocide going on in China. That's not something that happened 100 years ago.
Who knows what's
That's
happening
not something
in Russia.
that happened in Russia. This is mob-run Russia, Myanmar. I mean, all these situations that are horrendous human rights violations. But I feel like our administration would like to just write a report about why the U.S. was bad in the 1950s and 60s. And that's what they would like to focus on, because that's where they want to keep focusing all of our attention on, not what these countries are doing right now on camera to their own people.
Yeah, and they do it with impunity. I mean, there's no consequence here, Andy, for their actions, and that's why we have to keep bringing it up.
Well, that's what we do, Jay. The Ministry of Presence is partnered by the Ministry of Persistence. Presence and persistence. Those are the kinds of things that we do, and those are the reasons that we occasionally, but definitely will succeed.
Cece, and we only got less than a minute left here. Paint what the hostilities like at the UN generally. Like, you meet with these countries.
Yes, and you know that they aren't friendly to us, but I would say that the ECLJ has a good reputation. Yes. We even get thanks from the UN, which is almost unheard of our reports, because we do them respectfully, we do them factually, and, of course, we do them with the Lord backing us up too, and truth on our side. So
you just got to keep on slugging away.
It's persistent.
Yeah, it is Ministry of Presence, Ministry of Persistence. You're right. That's the new one.
Yeah, and so if you want to see all this work too, you go to aclj.org. It's all there for you as well. You can see it and how it's formalized, how we do our reporting, aclj.org. That's aclj.org. Throughout this week as well, I think we really have to watch this lead up. We've been threatened by the Russians. I don't think that this latest hack is the last one. I think we're going to see a parade of different actions by the Russians in the next 14 days in the lead up to this summit. They want to see how far they can push the U.S. until they cancel it. And that's what they're testing.